Hello and welcome to another episode of Looking for Yoda. I'm up here above Minneapolis on a beautiful day. Seems like summer finally decided to show up. Anyway, a few days ago I talked to Charmagne and it was fascinating. We talked about the healing properties of plants. We talked about the elements. We talked about astrology. We also talked about tea serving ceremonies and how beautiful tea is. She served me some tea. It was wonderful, and I really hope that you will enjoy this as much as I enjoyed it. It was really fun. So yeah, the two of us met in yoga. How long's it been, I wonder?
How long have we been yoga buddies?
Yoga buddies, yeah. You said that to me like, was it the first day or second day that the term yoga buddy came up, and I just loved it, and you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's how it was for a while before I even knew what your name was.
I know, and I'm terrible with names, you know. For a while there, I'll just be like, yeah, hey yoga buddy. And then later on it's like, her name is Charmagne, which is a very cool name. Do you have any idea how your parents chose that name?
Yeah, I mean, I know that the name is French. The story itself, as my mom tells it, is just that they found it in a baby book and it was spelled differently, so my mom changed the spelling and now it's French. And I usually introduce myself as Charmagne. Rhymes with champagne, otherwise people get a little bit confused.
I like that a lot. So yeah, how did you get into yoga?
Well, I was trying to think about how long that we've been, doing yoga here. We just got done with an hour of vinyasa also.
I
So
know.
we're feeling good. I've been coming to Yes since 2015, and
It's been a couple of years for me. Yeah, I really started in on the teacher training after only 6 months, I think. I've been here, and then I started the teacher training, and yeah, so I'd say about 2 years now. Close to 2 years.
time is a trip.
I know, it really is. It took me a while to find yoga. You know, I've gone through a lot of phases, or whatever you want to call them. I've been interested in so many different things that, early on I did martial arts and then different things, and I came into yoga later in my life, but I feel like it arrived at the perfect time in my life, exactly when I needed it, which tells you something about yoga.
Well, and I think too, like how with these practices, like sometimes we find them, but maybe more so they find us. I feel that way like quite a lot about yoga, about tea, about many things. Like it just, at some point, like you're just ready and the practice pulls you in.
Well, and the teacher too, because only a few times in my life have I entered a studio or a situation and then the teacher was the right person at the right time in the universe and everything, and it was like, wow. And I've had 2 or 3 teachers like that in my life, and Lucia is one of them. So
It's a beautiful human.
yeah, exactly.
I have to think. I've probably been doing yoga for, I guess, over 10 years now. It really, I was aware of it perhaps later in high school, just through the library, but it really became a practice for me in undergrad. Kind of out of necessity and healing before it was just joy and maintenance and ritual. I had a lot of, maybe not a lot, I don't know. I had some health difficulties in high school, probably started in middle school. I didn't have words for it then like I do now. I'd say now that it was anxiety and not really having language around that or skills for coping with it, and also just really not knowing what it is to be an empath in the world. And I think that really manifested as a lot of just stress and difficulty in my body, and did a lot of different elimination diets and medication and different type of treatment, and I actually had like a colonoscopy when I was like 20. Very cool.
Yeah, I've had a couple of those.
But you know, they didn't find anything, of course, and when I eventually like just got sick of it, I was really discouraged, like nothing was helping, and I just kind of decided that I was done with the medical piece of things at that time, and for the difficulties that I was having, and started to like teach myself more around like yoga and meditation, and I was also studying like psychology in undergrad. And all of a sudden, like all of this language is coming in to realize like what's going on, and this is how anxiety shows up on my body, and this is like a practice that really gives me the tools to not only like be in my body and change the relationship and change the story. It also is like a coping skill for like bringing those symptoms or those like stressors down a notch for 20.
I really like that phrase you just used, change the story. I like that. That's a cool way to put it. Earlier you were talking about the elements and how everything kind of like ties in with the elements. So I was kind of curious as to like, how do you mean the elements? How does it tie in with yoga, life, this plant, the sky?
How much time do we have?
Well, I mean, it's as much as you want.
Well, I get like tears in my eyes because I get so excited about it. So for me, like I'd say the biggest practice is, you know, yoga is kind of like the original practice for me. And over the last like 10 or 15 years, I've really like gathered other ones, and you know what really shows up for me the most in my life right now, or resonates the most, is like the combination of yoga, particularly yin, herbalism, tea, and tea ceremony, astrology, Ayurveda, and just like being outside and being on the land. And
I'd like to know more about tea. What? How did you develop an interest in tea? You've been to Taiwan, and how did that start?
I'd like to know more about tea. Right? It's like the more you know, the less you know.
Yeah.
With all of these practices. Tea found me a few years ago. I was browsing, looking for something at Dow Foods, and I saw like a little flyer about like tea ceremony, and it just like really pulled me in. I don't tend to like stop and like read those things, so my friend Kristen, who serves tea, she had just come back from like multiple months like studying just like healing traditions in Asia, and she had gotten really steeped in tea.
Yeah.
And so I did like a ceremony with her, and it was so beautiful. So beautiful. Like, it's magical, like in our world, to be quiet, to be slow, to just like show up without distraction. And it's also a really beautiful, like not only like contemplative and meditative practice, but to me it's very beautiful in like a sensory way. So, you know, sometimes there's incense, but even like more simply than that, just like pouring the tea and like the steam that, you know, comes up through the sunlight coming into the room, or like the sound of water. It's just very beautiful. So that first time I sat for tea, like in this style, so Chadao, like this style of tea ceremony, and there are many, kind of the rest rest is history, history. It's become like a huge part of my life since then. This style of tea or tea ceremony, there's a few different ways to practice, and there are many different traditions, you know, many of them coming from throughout Asia. Chodao is like the way of tea, and very, very old. We don't even know how old, but very, connected to like traditional Chinese medicine and Taoism, and tea has been used as part of a meditative practice for a long, long time. And my friend Kristen studied, she was traveling around quite a bit, but she was in Taiwan, and our teacher, Yoda, that's where he's based, and there's like a center there, and so they have a center where you can go and do like a 10-day course of like meditation and learning about tea and really nourishing food. So that's on my radar for 2020.
I'm not sure a lot of people, generally in the West, think of drinking tea as being like meditative. And I think that's, awesome. It kind of ties in with some of the stuff that I'm talking to people about, which is like, being in the moment, being in the flow, and like how you were describing the tea ceremony, it really reminds me of that, where the world kind of disappears and it's just all about the tea. And it's, how would you describe that connection when you're drinking tea to the universe?
How to word things that don't have words. For me, like I just feel tea. And I feel tea in my heart.
Yeah.
So it's a felt experience that I'm not necessarily sure how to describe, but like we've talked about flow.
Yeah.
And this idea of like, nothing else is on your mind. You're just right here. You're in the moment. You're in your body. Like that's how I feel being with tea. And I think a piece of that is the intentionality of the practice, like taking time and slowing down and having like these beautiful like earth-made items. But also a big piece of that is like the spirit of the tea plant. So this is, in ceremony we're having some version of Camellia sinensis, which is like true tea. And right, there's a million things like we call tea now, right? Like you can take red clover and make tea, or you can have all different kinds of herbal tea, but this is like true tea, and it's just processed or cultivated in different ways. This tea that we're drinking is like a red tea, but there's also like oolong, which is like rolled and really beautiful. So anyway, there's lots of different versions, but it's the same plant. And the spirit of the plant is very, very powerful, but soft. I think tea really embodies like the balance between strength and softness. Tea is very feminine and it's very yin. So I think that piece of it, along with the practice, the actual plant itself, is like working inside of us to like soften the heart and like soften the walls and like soften everything that we have to like barrier up against all day long in our like super fast and super busy and like almost assaultive lifestyles and world experience.
How would you describe, when you're talking about that, how would you describe the world we live in now, that like most people live in, like here in America? Like,
how would I describe it?
Yeah, how would you describe like these things that are coming at people? I'm fascinated because it just seems like, I suppose at different times in history, people have had things coming at them, distracting them, causing stress. Now we have, it just seems like there's traffic, there's the birth of social media, there's all of these things. So I feel like, I don't know if this is a harder time in history or it's kind of the same, and people are trying to, when you try to deal with it by doing yoga or drinking tea, you're trying to find that soft part of life. Plants keep coming back. Anyway,
The world, right? You're asking like how to describe the world.
Yeah.
And here's like my concern. Like as like a mental health therapist and also like an empath, and I feel like fairly tuned in with like myself and people and the land. Our nervous systems do not know what the fuck is happening. And maybe we shouldn't swear.
Yeah, it's okay.
Like for real. And you're saying, is this a worse time or more stressful time in history than it ever was? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's really different. I think in the past, like you knew what you were dealing with. You maybe didn't know when the threat was coming, but like a bear or like a war, or like you prepared for that and you kind of knew what was happening. I'm not sure that I'm articulating that well, but I know what I mean. Now.
Well, there was like a fight or flight kind of reaction to certain situations or things that were more, not simple, but more concrete. And whereas now it seems like we are almost constantly, unless we remove ourselves, we're almost constantly in this like a low level of fight or flight. Like it's all like,
all the time.
Yeah, did they like my post on Facebook? Did the traffic, the noise, all these things happening. It's like this low level of fight or flight, and so we're in a constant state of stress. And I feel like I first heard of this, I think Marnie or Lucia was talking about this concept of fight or flight. And it's different than it was fight or flight like 1,000 years ago or something.
Because it was on when it needed to be on.
Yeah.
And then it could be off.
Yeah.
And it needs to be off, like how our sympathetic and parasympathetic, like how our nervous system, how our whole body works is like you get all this energy for fight or flight so you don't die. But the rest of the time, like that can't really be on because your body needs to like rest.
Well, and you're producing,
digest.
and you're producing, and you're constantly producing low levels of adrenaline, and then it's not good to be producing that all the time.
Right.
The stress. Yeah.
Everyone has anxiety, like how it like hurts my heart because I feel like so much of ailments or difficulties that we have, like we take to heart, or we feel like are personal. And I'm like getting back to what we're talking about. What I mean is like if I have anxiety, or I have digestive issues, or I have reproductive issues, or I have heart problems, or I'm having a difficult time at my job for a while, or like that can feel really personal for folks. But like, how can you not? Like, my perspective is how can you not be struggling in some way? Like, how can you not be like sick in some way in a world that functions the way it does without the level of support catching up? And so I think a lot about ancestors, and I think a lot about times in the past. So like 200 years ago, you like take care of your animals and you're like working on the land and like loving and snuggling your family and like cooking and eating food and like living with the sun and the moon and having like real stressors, right? Like there could be major medical issues or like famine or poverty, like those things are real. But it's like more simple where, things now are infinitely complex, like traffic and social media, and our nervous systems, like they haven't had time to catch up with that, like being on all the time. So like how can our systems not be stressed? Like how many things do most people do in a day that their ancestors from 200 years ago would recognize?
Right.
Like if you took one of your ancestors from 200 years ago and they showed up here today, and they spent 24 hours with you, they'd lose their damn minds.
Yes.
Like what do you do that they would recognize?
Yeah.
So to me, the medicine of the times is whenever we could do things that our nervous systems of 200 years ago would recognize. Eating, sharing meals with people, walking, being outside, drinking tea, like snuggling, connecting with people, playing cards, like having conversations. Like, I think when you ask most people, when it really comes down to it, like what really nourishes you, like what soothes you, what is meaningful to you, I don't think much of that has to do with any of the developments of the last 200 years. It's still the same. We're just like complicating things. And, technology and medical advancements, and there's just so many really important things. But like, there's also a lot that we just take too seriously. Like, social media, I think, is a great example of that. I get really worked up about,
It's good. It's good. I mean, get to get worked up, but yeah, no, I understand.
Just like feel passionate about it.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy that we have to, it just seems like most people, they have to like really to take time out of their day. It's almost stressful for them to like, oh, I gotta make it to yoga, and they go do that. And it's like, and then an hour goes by and then they've found that moment and then they're back to their life. It's like, whoa.
Yeah,
It's like,
I feel like that a lot too. Just like rushing to get here, 35 is out of control. Get out of my way, I need to relax.
get out of my way, I need to relax. Oh, wow. So, what do you think your superpower is?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is hugs.
Yeah, I've noticed that. You're a good hugger.
I take hugs to heart and just like connecting and holding that space. So maybe if I could be famous for something, it would be hugging.
Well, I like it. I do think it's part of the modern world is that many of us don't feel human touch enough. Even if you're in a relationship, it's people are so busy, but actually intentionally hugging. I liked how you said earlier, like snuggling. People need more massage. People really need more of that.
Can I say more about this?
Sure.
So thinking about, like I talked about this with like ancestors and like that way of life and what the way of life is now, like related to like touch and connection and like overwhelming our nervous system. I think there's many people like, people that are, people that are single or, their children are getting older or they're maybe like aging for whatever reason. I think there's many people that can easily go through a day or even a week or longer without touching or being touched. And touch is really, really crucial. And for some people more than others, I think there's a bit of like temperament and comfort with that. But as a generalization, I would say touch is crucial to like well-being because of the impact that like pressure and input has on the nervous system.
I agree.
I see this like in my work, and I mean this is like a working theory that I have, that the lack of like touch and connection is really impacting us as adults, but it's really like dangerously impacting kids. Because they're like growing and developing, and their like systems are like learning everything, and kids need to like play and fall and get dirty and like crash into the wall and like all these things. They need sensory input to develop their whole body and their brain.
Yeah.
But like now, I feel like if you walk into a school or you walk into a home, like everyone is on their device. So like, parents aren't snuggling. They're not like snuggling with their kids. The kids aren't like wrestling. Everyone's on devices. And I think that's a huge loss of connection, the touch piece. That along with the fight or flight, some of the dangers of like living in modern world or, in a city is that we're not supposed to see so many people that we don't recognize. That's stressful. When you, like 200 years ago, if you live like with a tribe of folks or you like live in a village, like most of the people you see every day, because you see them every day.
Yeah.
And like if you see someone new, like that's kind of stressful because it might be like an invader or they're there to like
Right.
take your stuff or beat you
Right.
up or whatever. And now like we see more people in the day that we don't know than people that we do know sometimes, I think. And that really impacts the system, I think.
Yeah.
But when I think about like the meaning of life, what like comes up for me is this idea of the meaning of life is to play your edges. To like expand, to lean in. And I think that playing your edges to grow and to expand, and that it's possible for that concept as a meaning of life to be true for everyone, right? The meaning is to play your edges. But it is so individual, because I think some people are really here to expand their sense of what's possible in incredible ways, like physically, right? There's marathons and ultra marathons and like Olympians and athletes, and they're just incredible and like blowing our minds with what's possible to do with the body. For some people, it's like playing edges with like creativity. For some people, like playing edges just like emotionally or interpersonally. It doesn't have to be like big, it can be little too, for like some people, just getting to a place in life where you can open your heart enough to say like, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. That could be like a whole life work for some, it's just so individual.
Yeah.
I think I hope that makes sense.
Well, playing your edges, for some reason, the thought of like the idea of struggle comes to mind, because I have felt like during life that I have, for the most part, I've found more meaning or developed or more through struggle than I have for like those, the times when everything's just gravy, it's like, I've had things happen to me and I've had to deal with them, and I feel it's not like you would want everybody to struggle all the time, but how do you think about the idea of struggling as a character development or something like that?
I love, like, character building is like my favorite two words together. I'm enjoying like the synchronicity of this question, because I was really like, I had an amazing session or just like conversation with my therapist yesterday about this. And we were like talking about how struggle, your word, or like suffering, maybe more a universal term, right? And the Buddhists talk a lot about this, that like life is suffering. I think suffering is always going to be happening. Struggle is always going to be happening. And I think we orient our brains to, or our lives even, to like getting to a point where we don't struggle anymore. That's not gonna happen. It's so sad, right? Like, we see so many people, like, when I retire, I won't have to struggle anymore.
Right.
Or when I get in this relationship, I won't struggle anymore. Or like when I have this much money, or when I get this yoga pose, or when I get rid of my anxiety.
Or when I lose 30 pounds, or...
Yeah, that's a great example. That's just never going to be the case. It's always something. And a couple things.
Yeah.
One, I think we need to change our orientation towards struggle, because it's one thing to struggle, and it's another thing to fight the struggle. Struggling takes a certain amount of energy, and fighting with the struggle that we're having takes just as much energy, if not more, and is not useful. So I think accepting struggle as character building, as the way we grow, and not like fighting it or not taking it personal, right? Because I think so much struggle is personal, right? Like, I haven't had this much money or gotten this relationship or lost the 30 pounds, and that means something about me and who I am. Like, No, I mean maybe you could be like more disciplined or you could make these choices, but like it's just a process and you're like learning and growing. So I think accepting struggle as a reality, it's always been true for my entire life. I sense that there will be some level of struggling or suffering for the rest of my life, and I sense that it's true for most people. So just like learning not to fight that so hard, just like the fight. And the other thing I already forgot.
Well, they put a stent in my heart like 3 years ago, and I remember at the time going, "Oh crap," you know. But after they put the stent in my heart, I remember talking to somebody not so long after that, and they were like, "Look at this as an opportunity," and I was able to switch it in my brain. They said something like, "Hey, not everybody gets the chance to have a stent put in their heart, dude. Embrace it." And as absurd as that sounds, it really kind of made sense. It's like, yeah, wow. Or, you know, I've had my heart broken. Not fun, but at the same time, it's like, okay, it's suffering, it's struggle, but I'm learning. I'm having an opportunity to find out something about life that I wouldn't have found if I hadn't had a stent put in my heart and if somebody hadn't broken my heart.
Playing your edges.
Yes.
You wouldn't have chosen to do that.
No, exactly.
So like, look at how cool you are because that happened.
Well, I've had to adapt a lot from because of both things, you know. What makes you happy? Like what?
Oh my gosh. Wow. That is so great because in my head I'm like the word happiness keeps popping in as something I want to talk about. Yes, I also love high fives.
Well, I was afraid that happiness would be too general. Like, what is it to be human? What makes you happy?
So I want to talk about happiness, relating it back to suffering and struggle. I think happiness is a trap.
Okay.
I think that happiness is a Western trap. I think that we're told from a very young age, from our parents, from our friends, from the magazines, from social media, that the point of life or the goal of life is to be happy. That's a setup. That's like such a setup because there are going to be times when you are happy and there are going to be times when you are all the other things. It's not about happiness, it's about meaning. So like if you're like cultivating your life based on happiness and what you think will make you happy, I think sometimes that doesn't work. But if you're building a life on things that are meaningful to you, right? Like having children or having a partnership or having a job that's in service or owning land and you're being able to offer something to the world gives me meaning, then happiness will be a natural byproduct of that. But by pursuing happiness, I think it gets a little bit messy. Because when you choose meaning, and like cultivating a life, like you're going to be successful and you're going to fail and you're going to like feel all the feelings, and that's like being alive and that's being human, right? And Brene Brown talks about this. Do you know her? Brene Brown, she's like a PhD like social worker and she studies vulnerability. She's probably most like well known for a couple of TED Talks that she's given on vulnerability. They're really beautiful. I highly recommend them.
I will check it out.
But she talks about this idea that we cannot selectively numb our feelings or our experience. So like let's say you have a window of feelings and like here's happiness and here's suffering. And there's all kinds of things that go along with that, like grief and joy and pleasure and stress, you know, but this is your window. And you're like, okay, I want to get happier. It doesn't work like that. That's not really how it moves. Like when you open yourself up to feeling more or experiencing more, it goes like this. This is her perspective. I agree with her. I think that that's true. Like if you want to open yourself up to more joy, more happiness in your life, you have to be open to also to more risk, more vulnerability, more failing, more suffering. You can stay here. If you want to go here, you have to go here. So I think like chasing happiness versus meaning is dangerous, because then when you're not happy, you think you're failing. But if you're chasing meaning, you're like, wow, I feel like shit today. I feel like really down on myself, but I'm building towards things in my life that matter. And today felt like a 2 steps back kind of day, but like I know who I am and I know like what I'm doing in the world.
This is so cool. The opportunity I get to speak with people like through this medium, and this is my excuse to have these conversations. I'm learning so much and I'm having my mind blown, and it's just it feels so good.
It's so cool that you're bringing people together. I mean, when you asked, it was just like, I really appreciate like creativity and expression, and I've enjoyed like watching the videos that you've created. It's just like everyone is just like a wealth of knowledge and experience and information. And like I said at the beginning, like the more you know, the less you know. Like you get into these practices and you learn quite a bit, and then all of a sudden like it just opens up this other like portal or pocket, and you're like, holy shit, like there's kinds of tea, there's kinds of yoga, like
there's this and this. that blew my mind right there.
And like how different people are drawn to different things. Like, so the last thing, do we have time for this?
What time is it?
I want to talk about like the land, because like I love the land, I love the earth. I think it's really important too in these times for people to get excited about the planet, because we're in trouble. And I also really like love humanity. So I love like putting those together, like the people and the planet. And for me, a lot of this like comes in through astrology. In our chart, like most people know their sun sign, which is like your main sign. Like Sagittarius, Cancer. You also have like a moon sign, your emotional expression, a rising sign, how you show up in the world, Venus, how you love people, North Node, like your purpose. But those are like in certain signs. And there's 3 signs in each of the elements. So there's 3 water signs, 3 earth signs, 3 air signs, and 3 fire signs. I might have said total.
No, that's right.
So, like in your chart, like let's say you have like 10 different, you have like these different things, right? You have your sun, you have your moon, and if you tally them up, you can tally up like how many you have in each element. And to me, like using the elements is an incredible way to simplify astrology and really everything, in like potentially understanding people in a certain way. So like in my chart, I have a ton of fire and a ton of water. Not very much like earth or air signs. So like if you were thinking about water on fire, like what kind of land would you think about? Or like what nature thing would you think of?
Water and fire? I'd be in Hawaii.
And what's there? That like
volcanoes and surrounded by water.
Yes, volcanoes and surrounded by water. I want to go there. When I think about water on fire, I think about hot springs. I love hot springs. Like I'm obsessed with, and I've gone on so many trips to have hot springs experience, and I really appreciate hot springs culture. So I've traveled all over like Utah and Oregon and BC and California hot springs. I love them. It's a great adventure. I think like that land shows, it's just, you see the connection?
Yes.
But I also think there's a huge piece where land can balance us out. So it's like, well, then why don't you like live at a hot spring or like move where there's hot springs? There's no hot springs here. Well, I don't have a lot of earth in my chart, and I love, love, love feeling grounded. I love to feel grounded. I love to be on the earth, just like laying on the floor, like laying on the ground, being in the forest. So like while I travel a lot and love other places, like to me, Minnesota is so grounded.
Right. I remember once you told me something about part of you is from, I didn't know if you said Minnesota or the Midwest, and then the West was your lover, or how did that go again? I remember, how did you describe that?
Minnesota is my earth mother.
Right.
And the Pacific Northwest is my earth lover. So like that's about, and so I just think that like astrology and like things that come up in your chart can be a really cool way to like understand yourself, to help understand other people. And it's just like coming up, and this is like it's like a theory in progress. Like this isn't well developed, perhaps obviously, but I just like see it coming up. Like I have a friend who's a triple air sign. She has sun, moon, and rising, all in air signs. She loves the mountains. She loves the mountains. Like I can't think of a more like grounded thing in the world than like the majesty, the size, the content of a mountain.
Yes.
Right? I also, it's just like interesting to think about, in the way that like people relate, like if someone has a lot of fire in their chart, like you don't have to know a ton about like Sagittarius or, all like, but like, oh, this is kind of like a fiery person, right? They're like warm and talkative and curious, or like this person has a lot of water in their chart and they're like really empathic and like tuned in, but also like kind of sensitive and like changing a lot. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, no, totally. I wish I knew mine better. I know I'm a Sagittarius and I have fire, but I should get someone to read my chart again.
Yeah, you can go online for free.
Yeah,
I think
that's
even
true.
just like the element piece, like you can Google like free astrology chart or whatever, and you can get a little tally of like, I have this much earth and this much fire, and to me even that like tiny bit of information is cool.
Yeah.
Or like that's what's exciting to me at this point in my life.
There comes a point in these conversations where I start to feel like I want to keep going, but I feel like it's like I'm so overwhelmed by like talking with you, by all these things, that I reach a point where it's like, about an hour in, where I'm like, is there anything else you think you'd like to speak to?
We covered a lot.
Yeah, we did.
I also feel overwhelmed because I'm imagining people watching this being like, tea and the planets and yoga and hot springs. But I think that they're connected, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about them. And you asked me, I think the question that you asked me that I didn't answer is like, what makes me happy? And then I went on this tangent about how it's a trap. Connection like makes me happy.
Yeah.
I really enjoy like connecting with the land, like connecting with people, like this opportunity, the opportunity to like dig in, to like be open, and like connecting with myself, like through practices like tea, yoga, earthing, just those things. Connection makes me happy.
You're wonderful. You're absolutely wonderful.